Welcome to a new Daily Top AskReddit video. Today's topic.
What's the biggest lie that everyone believed at the time? That Marilyn Manson had a rib removed so he could suck his own dick. This transcended oceans, countries, and continents. I heard about it in France in the 90s, you're completely right. Richard Gere and the gerbil in his bum. That gerbil had a rib removed to suck Marilyn Manson's dick. True story. Cousin's buddy knew the gerbil. Some great jokes though. Why did the gerbil fail his driving test? Couldn't get out of gear. Fat makes you fat, don't worry about calories, carbs or grams of sugar. And for such a long time. Rip my pancreas. Rip my ass. People still believe this. A lot of people still have little to no understanding of nutrition, specifically with how the body gains and loses weight. They're not entirely to blame, because they've been fed a lot of garbage, literally and figuratively. But now people will fight you on it if you say it's just calories that determine weight gain. As a butcher, the number of people who will fight me about wanting the leanest cuts of a steak that will turn to shit, then coming back 2 days later and saying it was shit, is in the hundreds by now. The fat won't kill you, or make you fat in turn. Take the slice we recommend so you can enjoy your food. In 1898, the American battleship USS Maine was sitting in Havana Harbor when it suddenly exploded. The American press ran with the story that Spain, who still controlled Cuba at the time, was at fault. Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain. So we crushed the land and naval forces of the greatly diminished Spanish Empire in a matter of months, and took over Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Guam. The only problem? The explosion was an accident, no real evidence was ever found for Spain's guilt. The newspapers wanted to sell more copies, and President McKinley really wanted an empire like the great powers of Europe. The blame for the Maine falls mainly on the Spain. The Spanish-American War was just an unprovoked attack on the Spanish by the Americans. America is the Russia of its time. Give it a year, we'll be Russia again. The Gulf on Tonkin incident was one of many that got us embroiled in Vietnam. A crazier part is that it was started by Admiral Morrison, father of Jim Morrison, the lead singer of The Doors. Chop onions, and cook over low heat until fragrant and caramelized, about 20 minutes. Bullshit, takes like an hour. Used to work at a restaurant where my prep list included caramelized onions, and I used to just speedrun it. High heat, constantly flipping and moving. Did this for months until eventually I made myself some lunch with those onions, and realized they were not caramelized. They were just brown. Literally no one complained or told me. After that, just put them in a large pan and low heat cooked them all morning while I did the other prep, and they were so flavorful. Yep, let them simmer at a whisper, give them a poke with the spatula every so often. Magic. But slow magic. For real, caramelized and brown are not the same. I went all in for a whole summer learning to caramelize onions perfectly, and I ended up learning I like them better browned anyways, haha. Edit. The food pyramid back in the 90s. It was just the 4 food groups in the 70s. Comment stands though, everyone believed them. Ate a lot of breads and cereals in the 70s. Smiley face, thanks to everyone straightening me out. Where do cubes of cheese and pineapple fit into that? Presumably beside an entire baked ham encased in jello. The recipes from back then, some of them are just horrifying. That turning on the interior lights in your car while driving was illegal. This is just something parents told kids while driving, so they wouldn't fuck with the goddamn lights. Either women and men had different amounts of ribs until nursing school. I thought venous blood was blue until anatomy and physiology in college. Aristotle believed that the brain was just a minor organ for which the only purpose was to cool the blood. Today, we know this is true only in certain individuals. Quote, this myth is so prevalent. I teach anatomy and physiology to medical assistants and I ask them when their last blood draw was blue. Maybe they are secretly 500 horseshoe crabs in a trench coat. I was taught this in Sunday school. That men have one less rib because God used one of Adam's ribs to make Eve. We all just took it on faith, and not once through Christian elementary school did any of the kids decide to actually count their own ribs to verify. Same, good old Catholic gaslighting. I would have counted them myself, but you weren't allowed to even hold hands with the girls, much less get under their shirt. That tomatoes were poisonous. At the time, it was common to use pewter plates. The acid from the tomatoes reacted with the metal and caused lead to leach out, resulting in lead poisoning and leading to the belief that tomatoes are poisonous. Bad tomatoes. Tomatoes are also part of the nightshade family of plants, and their leaves look similar. That also probably contributed to this thought. The funny thing is that potatoes, same family, had the opposite problem when they were first introduced in Europe. Some people thought the berries the plant produces were edible, and poisoned themselves eating it. Others distrusted the plant altogether and called the tubers the devil's apple, as they grew underground. Another interesting nightshade fact is that potatoes are also in the same family. Potato plants will grow fruit and it actually is toxic and looks like a purple cherry tomato. Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme. His credentials were impeccable. He was a Wall Street veteran, had been chairman of NASDAQ. So people assumed his incredible ROI was from trading on insider information. The idea that someone of Madoff's stature would be running a simple in-out Ponzi scheme was ridiculous. That's what made it all so shocking. He was also investigated by the SEC and cleared. It instantly validated his returns in the eyes of investors and the public. He basically told the investigators, "Are you sure you want to investigate me? There's a good chance I'll be your boss one day. If you're really interested, you should get this book from your local library. https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/no_1_would_listen." Several really smart mathematicians tried to backtest his trades and couldn't do it. That was several years before he actually got caught. He literally just made up numbers of how he made money, and gains like that wouldn't be mathematically possible by buying shares and options. That the McDonald's hot coffee lawsuit was frivolous. McDonald's did a great job running that propaganda on that poor woman. Oh god, the Stellar Awards, they created a fake award for frivolous lawsuits and named it after her as a way of gaslighting us into thinking it was frivolous. Pretty extreme length TBH. You've got it exactly backwards. The Stellar Awards was a newsletter recounting similar stories with an eye on what actually happened. It was created because the author was pissed at how Stella Liebeck was seen by the public. WMDs in Iraq. How many 100,000s dead did it take before? Oopsie face with hand over mouth. Oh well, I'm sure you'll get over it. Quote, you know who was the first person to say this line repeatedly a decade before the war started? The ambassador to the United States from Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. I wonder what other truths we repeat from his mouth. A decade before the 2003 war started, Iraq absolutely had chemical weapons, though. That's not in dispute. Absolutely not. Yes, far too many people did believe it. But a huge number of people did not. It was not an everyone believed at the time situation, not by any stretch, not even close. And saying it was lets the gullible leaders who fell for it off the hook for the colossal idiocy. The tongue chart thing was taught in schools for a while. I'm so mad about that. I remember when they taught us that, I specifically tested my own tongue and found it false but assumed I must just be doing it wrong or had a weird tongue or something. How did that stupid myth ever become so prevalent when it's so easily tested? Question mark. The theory behind this map originated from a book written by Harvard psychologist Edwin Boring in 1942, too, which included a translation of a German paper, Zur Psychophysik des Geschmackssinns, The Psychophysics of Taste, by Dirk P. Hanig, written in 1901. 3. Boring replotted and normalized the graphs from the original paper, which were meant to show the taste thresholds of different parts of the tongue. The renormalized versions were interpreted incorrectly by other authors to indicate that there was no sensation where the curves showed a minimum, and maximum sensation where the curves showed a maximum, when the reality was a very small difference between the two. This suggested that each part of the tongue tastes exactly one basic taste. 4, 5, 6. The paper showed minute differences in threshold detection levels across the tongue. 7. But these differences were later taken out of context and the minute difference in threshold sensitivity was misconstrued in textbooks as a difference in sensation. 8. https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/tongue_map. That every song was devil worshipping when it's put in reverse. The Christian band Petra actually put a backwards message in one of their songs that said, "Why are you looking for the devil when you should be looking for the Lord?" Quote. That Lance Armstrong wasn't doping. And all the stories they told. That he had a weird spine that let more oxygen down to his legs. That he lost weight because of cancer and that put his power to weight ratio over the top. That his team was so cohesive they launched him to the top of the podium. I would tell my mom about him while she fought her own cancer. She died and never found out what kind of a liar he was. What also really gets me is he almost wound up a pauper, but he angel invested Uber and made a killing. Lol, I don't know a single person who was into cycling at the time that believed he wasn't doping. Everyone that he stood on a podium with was thrown out for doping at some point or another. I sort of think of it as Lance Armstrong was to cycling what Bonds or Clemens were to baseball, a juiced-up guy competing against and alongside a whole bunch of other juiced-up guys, but somewhat unfairly gets singled out for it. Cycling was a dirty sport. Baseball was a dirty sport for decades before they started testing in the early 2000s. I confronted someone at a bar once who claimed Lance was cheating. I wish I could find that guy now and tell him not only was he completely correct but that I was an obnoxious jerk. I think, confronted at a bar, and obnoxious jerk, are kinda redundant. And Greg Lemond was telling everyone that Lance was doping, even attending Lance's press conferences and asking him about it, and Lance just went hard denying it, trying to humiliate Greg, and this went on for years. The lying was really incredible. There are a couple of good documentaries about it. DARE. Drugs are really expensive. Seriously, this is the only way to deter teenagers. Closing parenthesis. I still want my freebie that they told me I'd be offered. We had DARE in 6th grade. DARE officer Dennis was our instructor. One time he brought in a suitcase that had little samples of all the different kinds of drugs we were supposed to stay away from. George Brown, thinking they were real drugs, tried to steal the suitcase and run out of the school with it. I am curious what happened after he tried to steal it. I've always believed it. Drugs are really excellent.